Okay, hi folks. I'm going to do a little follow-up video here to discuss the sunflower shoot disaster that I was addressing the other day. Just a quick reminder, went to uncover my tray. I was all proud and then it comes out and it's a fucking mess, basically. So this is the challenge. And I had said to folks in the last video as I uncovered, what are your thoughts on why you think this has happened? I got a few comments, and I'm going to address a few of those now. There's a little bit of information I'll add that might have been helpful, and everybody is thinking along the right tracks as well, so I'm going to address a few things. So first of all, I'm going to say I've grown some this is a fairly new system, but I've grown some very good crops of sunflower in here. They've turned out exactly how I would have thought they would. So I know the system is set up well, though there could be issues. So it's a tested system. So when I can typically grow something well and something goes wrong, the question I ask is, what did I do that was different? What happened that was different? One of the things that I said was different was, my window's been closed a bit more. So there's been a little bit less airflow. So that's a factor. Another thing I did, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit here because I think it's very important, is in watering my trays and getting them ready for planting, so I prepped about 4 trays ahead of time just so when I'm ready to seed, the trays are ready. One of my pet peeves is soaking seed, getting it all ready, draining, rinsing, and then I got to go fill a tray with soil. It's cold outside. So I usually prep a few ahead of time. As somebody did comment, you can't prep them too far ahead of time because they can get a bit of mold or things can go wrong. And there's bits, I can actually see little bits of mold on here, but things are okay. So another thing I did was, in order to hydrate the trays, what I did is I soaked them in. So I had put enough water in the mix to prepare the trays. As I've talked about, there has to be a bit of moisture in there to get your trays really well prepped. And then what I did is I placed the trays into my tray bath here and had them absorb water. So one thing I noticed that really stood out for me was how quickly this soil absorbed water. And the soil that we use at the Food Peddlers is our own recipe, so we know it very well. And it absorbs water, but it's a little more slow. So what I'm learning here is something about this new soil that I'm using. So this is a soil that, the basic mix I understand, but it's still new to me. And so there's some getting to know it. So here's a couple things I've learned about my soil that are going to affect how I grow future crops. Number one, it absorbs water very quickly. And number two, it holds water really well. I do not like a soil for microgreens that holds water too well. An example I have from the past is using a mix with mushroom manure in it. And it's a type of manure that holds onto water really well. In fact, it holds onto water too well. And we talk in soil management and soil science about the importance of holding water within the soil. But the fact is, a soil that holds water too well is detrimental because it needs to be able to let water flow in order to create airspace for the roots. So this is an important thing I'm learning about the soil, is having to be very careful about water management. The other thing is, in our soil mix, we basically created a raw mix, which means we said to the company, we don't want any of the extras. We just want raw peat, raw coir, compost, and perlite. We add lime to that, and I think we added one other thing, maybe an iron, so like an organic iron supplement. So it's very basic. A lot of the pre-mixes that you buy have a wetting agent in them. And that's because peat, when it dries out, it's actually really hard to rehydrate. So I'm going to guess that this soil has a wetting agent in it. That's why it absorbs the water so quickly, and that's why it holds on to water really well. I don't like that aspect of it. And what I would do is actually, in order to correct that, I would add more perlite to this mix. I'll also be more careful about watering before doing my sowing. So that's important stuff to understand. So water density within the tray, I think, is a big issue. Coupled with airflow, I think is also an issue there. Those are probably the two key things. I'm going to address a few things here that people had brought up, though. Comment about sanitizing seed. So I am not sanitizing seed for my home system, and I don't think sanitizing my seed would have solved this problem. This isn't a seed pathogen issue. This is probably a low airflow, too much water, good conditions for mold issue. The main reason we are sanitizing seed is to avoid human pathogens. Sanitizing our seed and regularly sanitizing our equipment and infrastructure is going to reduce all sorts of pathogens. But this one is, this is definitely more water and airflow based. So coupled with that, a few people mentioned sowing density being too much, there being too much seed. This is, if anything, I could sow denser than this. So I wouldn't look at this and go, oh, I need to reduce my sowing density. This is a really good, sowing density for this crop. I've grown 20,000 trays of sunflower at this sowing density, so I'm pretty confident in that. So this isn't the sort of problem I would see with sowing density. Now, someone had suggested like lifting up the tray and spraying with hydrogen peroxide. My rule of thumb is once things have been covered and are growing, I don't want to uncover them until they need to be uncovered. Having to uncover a tray while it's germinating, spray it, cover it back up, it's just steps I don't want to take. On a personal scale like this, it's because I want it to be easy. I don't want to take the time. And on a commercial scale, it's a cost. Further, every time you move things around, you're disturbing the trays, you're agitating the roots, that will slow down growth. That said, if this was a commercial scale and I did notice that, I would lift them up and spray them. But that's a Band-Aid. And that's, if you're doing that, you know, for too many weeks in a row, you've got other problems to solve. That cannot be the routine for sure. A note on that. So that said, if this was a commercial system, this wouldn't have happened only because I would have noticed it quicker. And here's why. So I've been watching this. I had my weight on top. I'm watching the seeds come up the bottom. And so I'm just monitoring, and every day I look at it and I have a sense of where the crop is at, and I know when I'm going to uncover. I just, you know, over time, I just know it, as many of you do. But when I went to uncover it, there was something in the back of my head saying, this should be higher than this. This should be pushed up. You know, this is where it was yesterday, and it's still at the same level. So this is interesting in that I noticed something, and because I'm a little out of practice, I didn't act on it, because if I would have lifted that up, I might have sprayed this with a hydrogen peroxide mix, only to save the crop and not lose the seed. This is still growing, but there's no way I'm putting this into my body, I can tell you that. So this is just a great learning experience. So that is a big thing. So it's a big, the lesson there is in noticing. You know, when something feels, when you've got a little something going, don't forget to act on that. This is a rule I've had for many years. And the sort of idiom or whatever that I've come up with is, when you're not sure what to do, when there's that voice in the back of your head, do something anyways. And I should have just stopped, because it was a few times going like, why isn't that going? And I should have just lifted it up to take a look. Because I could have controlled that with hydrogen peroxide, and I would have gotten a crop. And then I would have made all the same observations and corrections, but I also wouldn't have lost this, you know, $2 worth of seed and stuff. It's not a big deal, but it's just a waste of resources. So a couple lessons for me here are open the window, get a little bit more airflow. These mixes, I need to loosen these up and mix them up a bit. I may go get some more perlite to loosen this mix up a little bit, and I'm going to be much more careful about water at seeding time. With my other mix, this would have been okay, but I can see with this mix, it is not. And that's probably about it. I see a few comments have come through. I'm going to see if I can pull them up here, if they come up again. Some messages, spam. I want to see the messages. Okay. A lot of problems with pole mix. It holds too much water, completely saturated. So nice to hear someone, well, not nice to hear somebody else having that problem. The issue there is, I'm going to guess, that wetting agent. Now, there are some OMRI, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute, certified mixes, which means they're basically certified for certified organic production. That applies to the US, not in Canada, but it's a good guideline. And I think a lot of those do not have that wetting agent in there. The reason being, because a wetting agent is usually proprietary, and if companies aren't willing to share that information with Omri, Omri won't list a product. So having that, not having that wetting agent in there might make this a little better. If I assume there is a wetting agent in there, then what I'm going to do is actually use a little less watering and add some vermiculite in there to loosen up that mix. I do like a really loose mix. The disadvantage is you end up actually trying to, you end up watering more in hot conditions, but that I think is worth, that's worth it to me. Just another note here asking if I can do other crops. Yes, I can, and I will get to it. The reason I do sunflower is it's the thing, this is my home system, and it's the thing I like to eat the most. As you may recall, I've been doing some trials with spelt grass, which have failed, even though I do have my subsequent wheatgrass germination test here, which is looking great. And I still have my seed company follow-ups to do on that. But I will be looking at adding pea and probably radish to these systems. And then probably what I'll do is pick one of the finer micros as well, such as arugula or kale, something like that. If you have some requests, throw them out there. Just a note here, I don't use soil in my indoor farm. So in that case, you're not going to have to worry about this sort of things. Obviously, every system has their challenges. As folks may know, I'm a big believer in using soil, but there are more and more methods for soilless growing that are arising. So I will be testing some hemp mats out in this system and doing some stuff there. I'll talk about my expectations before I do it, and then we'll see how those come out. But yeah, that's good. If you're not using, definitely. Let's see here. Now, do we have other? Okay. Why do I advocate soil? On a simple basis, great question, by the way. I think food should be grown in soil. It's actually, if I look at this soil, once I use it here, I can actually use it elsewhere. I can compost it and put it into a garden or somewhere else. A soil with a good nutrient base is going to give a lot more to the plant, even though there's mixed literature on that. The other thing is, and I've only seen some life cycle analyses. We look at soilless mixes, and there's a lot of promotion about they use less water. They don't need the soil. Water, depending where you are, it's important to remember that it's not like water goes into a system and then it disappears and is wasted. Water is part of a continuous flow system, and this actually uses very, very little water. So to think there's an advantage to a system that uses less water when this already uses a minimal amount of water isn't, to me, a convincing argument for it. Some of the infrastructure for the soilless mixes can be quite more capital intensive. So this is a very simple system. And here what I've done is I've upgraded with better quality trays that are recyclable. So they'll have a longer lifespan, and when they're done, they will be recyclable. And then the other thing is there are some good advances in the soilless systems in terms of organic fertilizers, but a lot of the systems are based on using a synthetic fertilizer. And there the issue is with that synthetic fertilizer goes into the water. The water, depending where the water goes, if it goes back into a natural ecosystem, those nutrients are in the form of salts, and those salts getting into ecosystems cause problems. Also, the creation of those minerals has an ecological effect as well. The extraction of nitrogen from the atmosphere using the Haber-Bosch process, which is how synthetic nitrogen is created, accounts for 1% of all the world's energy use. And 1% seems like a small number, but 1% of a big number is another big number. That said, I'm not going to disregard the fact that the perlite, the compost, and the coir and the peat that are in here, they take resources as well. Like, it takes time and energy to extract them, to process them, package them up, and to ship them. There is no really good, ecologically sound, carbon neutral way to do just about anything, despite what we would like to think. It takes energy to produce these things. It takes resources, and even if we're recycling the resources, there's generally a net energy loss. So that's a bit of an elaborate thing to think of. I do think this is a very complex argument, and so because it's complex, I'm just sticking with soil. I do appreciate the comments. That's very nice. Yeah, so I'm going to look at continue. I'm going to get another crop going of the sunflower very soon. Hopefully, it's not a failure. I'm going to empty these soils and redo them because I think they're too wet. So using the principles that I've talked about in the lesson I've learned, there should be no reason why my next batch shouldn't be perfect. If not, y'all should be questioning how good I am at this. I will hopefully have new wheatgrass seeds soon to replace the spelt grass that hasn't done well, and we'll look at some other crops as well. So keep the comments coming. Thanks for the interest. Thanks for your feedback on this stuff. Those were some great suggestions. And yeah, I'm going to have some more material coming soon.